Welcome, Dr. Namrata Sharma, ma'am, who's
I just joined in
joined
too.
the session, ma'am, and welcome. And I think it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Digvijay. And I think you can continue with the session and maybe we can extend a little bit on the next session. I have just talked to them and made them aware of this because this was not there in the earlier. Okay. So carry on.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you so much, ma'am.
Over to Rohan Puja.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So we'll start the Youthful IRSI session now. First, it's an honor to introduce Dr. Sumit Lahane, who is an assistant professor at Grant Medical College and Sir JJ Group of Hospitals in Mumbai. He has done his fellowship in oculoplasty and oncology at Center for Sight, Hyderabad, and a cornea fellowship at Narayan Nethralaya. He currently mentors many youngsters and pushes them to succeed and excel. And no one better than Sir to talk about his experience in pushing residents to clear more than one examination during residency. Over to you, sir.
Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, SAO organizers, Dr. Digvijay, and of course, Rohan and Pooja for including me in this session. And again, it's very honor to present in a session where Azad sir has presented and started the session. So I'll be talking about basically my experience in pushing your residence and residency via exams. Now let's start with I have no financial interest here. Disadvantages of doing all this. Very first is economical concern. Again, not all the PGs are from the same background, and many times I have faced this that they say that there is a problem in paying a fees for a certain exam, especially the international ones, and they don't want to do it. Then there are different goals of setup. Then I have people, few of them who are from uh, army colleges, and few are from the rural setup who wants to go back to their own thing, and they keep asking me questions that I don't want to do any abroad fellowship or don't want to settle there. Then why do you want me to give this kind of exams? It's a very valid questions, and again time consuming for a few of them who feel so. So starting with the disadvantages, moving on, when I have to tell them, this is the advantages which I see, which I have seen in last few years. I have been mentoring my students. Basically, we'll come back to this slide after we finish all the slides again. So the first thing is basically we invest our 3 years in studying for our mastery in ophthalmology. It could be DNB, it could be MS, FCPS, whatever. So we end up investing 3 years and getting one degree. My question is very simple. What is the harm if you invest your 3 years and get 2 or 3 degrees? It is going to be a good experience in your curriculum, and it is going to be a certain thing that you will take back. And in the same amount of time, getting a more degrees is not a bad idea at all. Then what is other advantage? Again, after finishing residency, we do have lot of options what to do. Can we join a corporate hospital? Do we want to go for fellowship? Or do we join a government hospital straight together? Or we want to start our own setup? And if at all we want to go for a fellowship abroad, do we have enough grants, or can somebody give us grants? So giving certain exams, of course, opens certain other ways for us, especially going for a fellowship abroad. We have no new doors open by clearing few of these exams. So of course you open new doorways and you have more opportunities when you give such kind of exams. Very important aspect from my, for which I started pushing my residents for this, is that they do study when there is an exam coming. This has been from the school that we have been taught there is an exam and then you need to study, and we need to study to excel in the exam. This old concept which is there in our mind is never gets cleared up, and we don't study when somebody tells us to study unless we have an exam to prove ourselves, or to get a pass mark on the result paper. We do study. So important aspects from my side is they do study when they know there is an exam next month which they have to excel in. Reading between the lines, this is what I experienced when I was giving the exams, that when we read generally for the theory or to understand the subject sometimes, that I have certain questions. Nowadays everything including DNB has a question bank, and we know what portion is important out of the textbook. That was a good idea till we were in MBBS or 10th or 12th standard, but not when you are doing masters in any subject. Leaving something for the option during 3 years of residency just because it is not asked in the exam is not good idea at all, I feel. So when we read, we underline certain things, but we do miss out. There are certain important facts. Most of these exams are basically OSCE based, or these are MCQs, and those are conceptual exams. So you do read between the lines when you want to prepare for the exam. Specifically, you understand a topic and a subject better when you want to read it for a certain question oriented or exam oriented time. This is just an example that one of the exam that we give during residency, the International Council of Ophthalmology. Giving this exam has its own advantages. Of course, there is dispute going on, but still clearing your 3 ICU exams gives you some doorway or some shortcut to give your FRCS when you want to give it later. And of course, ICU has its own fellowship program for which they do give grants. So when you want to apply for a fellowship abroad, the ICU is one of the doorways that opens for you, and post residency you have more options to go through the ICU fellowship program. So that's why giving this ICU exam step by step is again very important aspect of your residency, which should be aspect of your residency. Another advantage is you have something to add in your biodata, because you will be going for a fellowship or you will going for a job. They are going to ask you how are you different from rest of the 10 candidates who are here for the interview. Of course, having a degree, the front person knows that this guy is some additional degree and he has put some extra effort than the others to get it in its CV. So of course, adding something to the CV is very important. So having this again, one of the thing, like you do your FRCS not during residency but later, just walking on the path and getting your degree at the FRCS venues, of course, could be fascination for some, and this is again I will put as a advantage of giving these exams. I went through some literature while I was preparing for the presentation. I realized the studies have been done to know what is the status of your postgraduate study, and the conclusion for most of them were the same, that on the whole, the students still felt the need for the improved training across all aspects of ophthalmology. And of course, they did study that what are the aspects. They did ask questionnaires, that there were workshops taken, and the students gave a feedback that there is a PowerPoint lecture, wet lab, case presentation, video library. Everything is very important in their curriculum, and that will basically help them to learn better in their residency. Now, covering all this point as a feedback, as a part of the questionnaire is very important, and they should be the part of their curriculum. But we forget the most important thing, the value of the self-study. We do forget the story of Eklavya. We are there as a mentors and teacher to guide you in each and every aspect of your residency. But we will not be able to teach you if you are not ready to learn. So the self-study plays a very important role, which is missing out of all the studies that have been done. Goal of the teacher basically should to motivate your students to make them ask questions, like Azad sir in his presentation, he asked us that do you have any questions. Of course, you need to motivate the younger generations who are coming, and tell them that they need to read, they need to get inspired. Unless you ask questions, you will not be behind finding their answers. So the important aspects for us as the teachers is to motivate our students so that they read and not only listen to us. We do take exams in our college, and we do display the results to the students. But again, those are at the local level. They do motivate them to read. But having a competition, worldwide competition, is not what they realize when they are giving exam at the local place. So when they have to go back and they finish their residency and go back into the real world, they do understand that there is a competition outside, which is they were completely unaware about during their residency. Giving such exams is again advantage, which exposes them to the world, and they know that they have a tough competition outside. Before concluding, I will go back to the slides where I want to put those advantages in summary. So basically, it's about go back to a structure and a conceptual reading, like I told you, reading between the lines. Know and retain things better, because most of the things, like even in the presentations we see nowadays, some senior doctor is presenting, and we sitting in the delegates basically take pictures of those PowerPoints instead of taking notes. And I don't think so anyone of us hardly opens those photographs and see what was being told in a lecture. So we don't retain things. Of course, it's a CV addition. International certificate is basically a door for a fellowship, a national or international. Of course, there is a grant access. There is increased interest in the subject because students do read for the exams, and now they know better what are they seeing in the OPDs and OTs. That's realization and utilization of the time. Like I told you, in 3 years instead of 1 degree, if you are getting 2, what's harm in that? Thought exchange program is what I want to stress upon. Is we keep talking about residency exchange program, but in reality, hardly it happens. But when the students go for this exam, of course, they do happen to meet students from the other colleges, and then there is of course a thought exchange program, and they know that what is going on in the other institute and the idea then being shared. So this is very important exposure to the other college residents, and of course it is contagious to the next batches. Once the one batch has given, the next batch is feel, so that it is very important for us to give because it becomes a part of the curriculum and not an addition to the curriculum. So just to conclude, 3 years are not only for the residency, but it's basically a comprehensive fellowship. Orientation is always earlier the better. Instead of coming into fellowship, if you get that in residency, it is going to save your time. Teaching and lectures are basically inputs, while the performance and the written knowledge are the early output measures of the residency and the students, which we should measure somehow. Self-study and motivation for the same are important, yet the neglected part of the residency. An exam should not be taken just for the evaluation. These are basically tools of teaching and not just the door to exit. I would like to thank all my students who dedicatedly work with me, and they try to learn and explore the world of ophthalmology. Again, I thank organizers for giving me an opportunity to present in front of this forum. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk and so much inspiration to all the young guns who, don't know where to go ahead with in residency and whether to give an exam or not to give an exam. We have our next speaker. I would like to introduce Dr. Rohan Mehra. He's done his fellowship in phaco and refractive surgery from Narayan Netralaya, Bangalore. He's the medical director at the CKI Institute in Saharanpur, consultant at the Vision Eye Center, Mumbai, and co-founder with me of the Youthful IRSI. Over to you, Dr. Mehra.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pooja. And without further ado, I'll share my screen. And so I'm going to be, I have no financial interest in the subject matter of this presentation. I'm going to be talking about staying afloat in private practice as a beginner, how to invest wisely. So I've on purpose put this slide as the first slide, staying afloat in a rapidly changing industry. So our industry, the ophthalmology industry, is an extremely rapidly changing industry, and we have to stay up to date all the time. There are changes coming in every 6 months. There are changes coming in all aspects of ophthalmology. Take, for example, the phacoemulsification machine itself. Started by Kelvin in 1969, and now here we are 50 years later. There have been so many advancements, and there have been so much changes in the fluidics. Along with that, of course, it brings in a huge cost. Take biometers and the timeline for that as an example. We had the Bausch and Lomb keratometer, then we got into the contact biometry, the immersion came in. And then once the partial coherence and the low coherence interferometry came in, we thought this is the final frontier. This is a no-touch technology, optical biometry. Just when we thought that this is the final frontier, therein came the swept source OCT, and which is now considered to be the latest and the gold standard in biometry. So all these things, they come in with a cost. So as a beginner, we do not have that much of backing or that much of confidence to invest in machinery, which helps us in getting us outcomes. So it is a vast world waiting outside. on purpose for this photo. The man walking through this door only to find that the ocean is on the other side, and it is a vast world. We can't do everything. One person will not be able to do everything. So you've got to manage your finances extremely wisely. Managing money is an art, and in order to get the best out of it, we have to spend wisely and spend smart. By that, I mean all your basics should always be in place. But when it comes to high-end equipment, high-end machinery, you have to be smart. You have to always calculate your revenue per minute. So why I talk about revenue per minute is because if you look at all the big multinational companies, they have also started calculating the revenue per minute rather than calculating it per month or per year. The reason behind this is that nowadays it has all become mostly an appointment based system. Everybody has fixed timings. You have to maintain a balance between your life and your family life. So gone are the days where you would be sitting from 8 o'clock in the morning right up till 10 o'clock at night and waiting for patients to come whenever they walk in. Now you have to basically manage your time well, give appointments according to the time that you have so that you can maintain your balance with your family. Always and always, we had this lecture by Dr. Mohan Rajan in the recent IRSI, and he spoke to us about return on investment. And he made some very pertinent points wherein you have to invest not according to what your neighbor practicing ophthalmologist has invested in. If somebody has got a new machine, they must have done their calculations and thought that they'll get a return on their investment. It is highly possible that you will not. So you don't have to get under that peer pressure and invest in a machine which costs a lot and your return on investment is not there. So these are the things that, you get into that trap of EMIs, paying off those EMIs. So you stop working for yourself and you start working for the company. So return on investment has to be calculated prior to investing into a machine, and always your return on investment should be calculated at at a lower end, as in you should always calculate it in a negative. Whatever you get on top of that is always a positive. So money flies. So for example, we have had experiences with ophthalmologists investing in equipment and then struggling to pay EMIs out of that equipment. So Dr. Mohan Rajan also made a very valid point the other day when he was talking to us. He said that you have to make sure that that particular machine pays for itself. Even if you're not earning, you need that machine, of course, to give good treatment to your patients, but that machine should earn from itself. So Make in India, we have got a push from the industry now. Thankfully, our Indian industry has picked up and we are making a lot of machinery, a lot of lenses, medications, all in India, and they are at a reasonable price. So always look at the Indian products before you go ahead and buy the expensive machinery that is offered to us by the multinational companies. And now, especially companies like Appaswamy, they have all upgraded all their machinery. A personal example that I'd like to share, we had to upgrade our YAG laser. We already had about a 15-year-old Appaswamy YAG laser. We looked at all other options. And then we went ahead and we took the Appaswamy YAG laser itself. And it's wonderful. They have upgraded the machinery. It is a step up from the previous laser that they had. And it did not, put a hole through our pocket also. And at the end, always the ABCD of practice: availability, behavior, competence, and documentation. This documentation has become very important nowadays with a lot of medical legal problems that people are facing. So you have to be available in your practice. Your behavior towards your patient always counts, competence, and then documentation. With that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohan. Do we have any questions?
I think that was a great talk, Rohan, and you brought about all the points pretty well. I also would suggest, for anybody who's buying big equipment like lasers or maybe phaco machines, to talk to the companies and try to go and see them at their centers where are being used, and be upfront and frank in asking questions to the consultants. because we must understand that we as peer owe it to us, our colleagues, to tell the honest truth about what is happening. Because if we don't support each other, and this is something we need to learn at a very young age, we need to be very upfront and honest about what is performing and what is not to each other. But great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Zaim Khatib. He's a private practicing ophthalmologist in Mumbai, working primarily at the Khatib Eye Clinic and a visiting consultant in multiple hospitals. He's completed his MBBS from KEM Hospital, Mumbai, and MS Ophthalmology from KIMS Hubli. He's also cleared his DNB and FICO exams. He is well trained in phacoemulsification and anterior segment surgery, having completed his long-term fellowship from Lakshmi Eye Institute and a short-term observership in the Advanced Anterior Segment Surgery from Moran Eye Center, USA. His area of interest includes phacoemulsification, refractive surgeries, glaucoma, and neuro-ophthalmological. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pooja and Dr. Rohan, for inviting me to be part of this session. So my talk today is going to be on current trends in biometry. There are a lot of points to discuss with respect to biometry. We all know that it has become something really important in cataract surgery today. But I'll be dividing my talk into three important aspects pertaining to biometry. The first part is regarding the axiometry, which is the axial length measurement, anterior chamber depth, pachymetry, and so on. The second part is about the keratometry. And the third part is about the ELP prediction, or rather about the formula being used. So we all know the year 1999 revolutionized axiometry because we changed from ultrasound contact axiometry to contactless optical biometry, and Zeiss has to be credited for this by introducing the IOL Master 500, which was the first optical biometer. So when the IOL Master 500 was released, they used something called as partial coherence interferometry. So all the optical biometers work on the principle of interference, wherein a light is reflected through a mirror and then passed into the eye, and both the interference pattern from the eye and the light are then detected by a detector, and we get an interference pattern to find the difference between the distance between two structures. So the IOL Master 500 partial coherence interferometry used a light source called as MMLD, which was 780 nanometer. And as you can see, it didn't have a smooth waveform, but it had multiple peaks around the 780. The second thing about this technology was that there were two mirrors. One was a fixed mirror and one was a moving mirror. So both these mirrors together were used to create the interference pattern. And ultimately what we got were signals like this, where you can see you can't really make out the spikes properly, where exactly you get a good spike. So in other words, the signal to noise ratio was very low. The noise was high, signal was low. But the software had its own technology by which it took multiple of these patterns and it could eliminate the noise from the signal. And with multiple readings, you could get a peak like this. But this software came at a cost, because you had to use this software to differentiate the signal from the noise. You could only use it for one particular distance. So that distance was from the anterior surface of the cornea to the front of the RP. So we only got axial length by this technology. After this came the Lenstar LS900, which was which was based on a technology called as optical low coherence reflectometry, OCLR. And here you can see the light is a superluminescent diode of 820 nanometer, and it has a smooth waveform. And here we had only a single reference mirror, which was movable, not two mirrors. And as a result of this, the interference pattern which was created was much more precise as compared to the partial coherence interferometry of IOL Master. And the final spectral interferogram was then Fourier transformed to give us a signal. And because of this technology, we could actually measure distances between multiple structures. So we got the anterior posterior surface of the cornea, anterior posterior surface of the lens, and the retinal peak. So we could measure things like pachymetry, anterior chamber depth, and lens thickness, all using the axiometry. So because of this, we could integrate newer formulae like the Barrett formulae using the technology. We know that it uses the lens thickness as well. So a lot of machines were based on these technologies, but today today, okay, what are the advantages of the OCLR Lenstar technology over the PCI? Is that there's much lesser noise. We've discussed that, and we could take all the readings as well. But the drawbacks of both these technologies were that it had poor penetration through dense cataracts and posterior subcapsular cataracts, and it had a slower scan speed. So today, what we have, which is kind of pushed away these other technologies, the swept source OCT technology, whereas the light source is a tunable laser. So swept source means that the laser actually sweeps across the entire wavelength in small parts. So as a result of this, we have extremely fast speed of scanning, and it can be done through the even most dense cataracts, which is something which is really important. And as far as I know, we have 3 machines available in the market today which use swept source technology. That is the IOL Master 700, the Tommy OA 2000, and the Heidelberg Antirion. The OA 2000 and IOL Master 700 are pure biometers, whereas the Antirion actually is an anterior segment OCT along with a topographer. So that was about the axiometry part. Let's go on to the keratometry part. So one thing is there that most optical biometers, whichever technology they use, they are all extremely accurate in measuring axial length and comparable also. But measurement of keratometry is where most machines differ, because each machine will measure a different zone with different number of points and different methods. Let's just study how exactly the different machines work for keratometry. So there are machines which measure only the anterior cornea, and there are machines which measure both the anterior and posterior cornea. The ones which measure anterior cornea, actually, what they do is that they modify the refractive index of the cornea from 1.376 to 1.3375, and this modification helps negate the value of the posterior cornea. And the ones which measure both anterior and posterior cornea, they keep the refractive index of both the same and actually measure both of them. So the machines which measure only the anterior cornea, the ones which are based on corneal reflectometry, IOL Master 500, Lenstar, Nidec AL scan. So the initial machine of which was IOL Master 500 measured only 6 points at 2.3 mm zone, which was not ideal. The Lenstar, which came later, actually measured 32 points in 2 zones. And the Nidec AL scan, I think, which is which has more accuracy, actually measures 256 points in 2 rings of zones. So these are all basically evolving technologies how the keratometry could be made more accurate. Then we have other machines which do keratometry based on Placido disc system, that is the Tommy OA 2000, which is just does a 5 mm topography, and the Topcon Aladdin actually does a full topography. So if you look at the Tommy OA 2000, you get 9 Placido rings, and you can get keratometry at the 2, 2.5 and 3 mm zone. 2.5 is what is recommended for lens power calculation. Machines which measure both anterior and posterior cornea, you have keratometry based on Scheimpflug principle, which is seen in the Pentacam AXL. Again, Pentacam we know is a time-tested topographer, and AXL is something which is an added-on biometer machine. But again, that works on partial coherence interferometry and not swept source based. And the ones which are based on OCT are the IOL Master 700 and Antirion. Now, do you actually need measurement of both anterior and posterior cornea? So for years, measuring only the anterior cornea was done, and all our modern formulae actually are based on this principle. So for routine cases, I don't think there's any issue at all for biometry part in measuring only the anterior cornea and modifying the refractive index. Where the machines which measure both anterior and posterior cornea actually work are in post-LASIK eyes, whereas the refractive index modification is not valid here because we are changing the relation of the anterior to posterior cornea. So in post-LASIK eyes, definitely measurement of anterior and posterior cornea is required. There is a debate on whether measuring the both anterior and posterior cornea actually helps toric lenses because of posterior corneal astigmatism. I have not really felt that this actually holds true, and the Barrett study itself proves that with the nomograms we have for the predicted TCA giving better results than the measured TCA, actually for toric lenses, you don't need a machine which will need to measure the posterior cornea. So according to me, when you're talking about keratometry, the most important thing is which machine measures the keratometry fast, because we know that keratometry is most sensitive to tear dynamics. If you do it for a longer period of time, the result can change. So just sharing 2 videos of the fastest machines that we have. So this is the IOL Master 700. You see the keratometry is getting measured now. It's taking few seconds. And yes, that is done. So that was the keratometry measurement, pretty fast. If you look at the Tommy OA 2000, you just focus on the center and just have a look. So that fraction of a second when the Placido rings came, that was when the keratometry was measured. So we see how fast it is. So according to me, the faster it is, whichever technology you use will give you a good result. There's another thing called as telocentric keratometry, which the IOL master machines follow. That is, the distance of the machine from the eye actually in normal machines would alter where the points are on the cornea. But in the IOL master machines, whatever be the distance you measure, the points will be at the same part measured, at the same ring, the points are measured. So that is something which also helps the accuracy of keratometry. So coming to the third part, that is the formulae. So we have regression formulae, which we all know. These are time tested. Then the most popular formula used today is the Barrett Universal 2, which is a combination of both theoretical and regression. And we have a lot of newer formulae nowadays. So the Olsen is based on ray tracing. The Hill RBF is based on artificial intelligence. We have version 3 right now. The EVO is another theoretical formula. And the latest one right now is the Kane formula, which is also based on artificial intelligence. Now, why is the Barrett such a popular formula? There are two landmark studies which actually show the supremacy of the Barrett formula. So this one by Kane et al. In the JCRS compared these regression formulae with the Barrett Universal. And the results clearly show that across the range of axial lengths, the Barrett actually outperformed all these other formulae. So this was one landmark study. This is another one by Mellis et al. In the American Academy of Ophthalmology, studying 13,000 eyes, which again compared these formulae along with the Olsen. And in this also, you can see the mean prediction error for the Barrett is closest to the 0 mark. Olsen is also pretty good, but you can see Olsen is going slightly hyperopic, but Barrett and Olsen seem to be outperforming the others. And the other formulae like SRKT and Hoffer-Q and all are also with the Wang-Koch modification. So in spite of having the Wang-Koch, Barrett outperformed them. This is one of the latest studies because this is the newest study which has tested the new formulae like Hill RBF and the Kane formula. And this particular study from JCRS studied 10,000 eyes. And here, contrary to most other studies, the Barrett is being placed at the 5th position. And this study very categorically states that the Kane is a more accurate predictor of post-op refraction compared to all others. So why did something like this happen? If you look at this study carefully, they have not put in details of crystalline lens or white to white. And we know very well that Barrett being partly a theoretical formula, without the crystalline lens thickness or white to white, you won't get that good and accurate result. So it's important to study yourself and see your results. This is one of our studies which is under publication, which was comparing the SRKT, Barrett and Kane. And we can clearly see that Barrett outperforms the SRKT and Kane both. And you can see here as well, the percentage of 0.2 and 0.5 is more in Barrett as compared to the Kane. So this is under publication. This is one of the studies which we have already published again between Barrett, EVO and Hill RBF version 2. And it again shows that the Barrett performs better than the other two. So ultimately, Barrett, I would say, is a very accurate formula. It can be safely used for all axial lengths. The biggest advantage is available on most biometers now. Olsen and Hill RBF version 3 also are good, but they are only available on Lenstar. And the Kane is very promising, but only available online. Barrett also is available online on the APACRS website, and it has a series of calculators for different conditions. Just to summarize what I discussed, if I would buy an optical biometer today, the desirable features would be I would need a biometer which gives me reliable axiometry, and the SWEP source has the best ones today. SWEP source are going to take over the others very soon. I would buy a biometer which would have a quick keratometry more than anything else, and a calculator which would have the Barrett formulae, preferably Barrett Universal and Truque, but preferably Toric also. So thank you. And this is the newest Lenstar, which is also coming with a SWEP source technology. So SWEP source technology is here to stay. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Zain. Covered all aspects of biometry very well, including the formulas. So would you now say that the Barrett Universal, the the Barrett's formula is the go-to formula for all eyes, whether it be short eyes or long eyes? Is that have we reached that stage that we don't need multiple formulas anymore?
I think we have reached that stage quite some time back. But besides the post-refractive surgery eyes, I think Barrett is definitely accurate compared to the others. But having said that, the formulae which are based on artificial intelligence, like the Hill RBF, are constantly evolving. So every time they come with a newer version, their data set inbounds becomes better. So definitely artificial intelligence formulae are here to stay, and they may overpower Barrett in the coming days. I think right now Barrett is as accurate as any other.
Thank you. Any questions from the panelists or the chairperson? So any questions, or we'll go ahead with the next?
I think very well presented. Let's proceed.
Right. So next we have Dr. Pooja Mehta. She is a consultant at CKI Institute in Saharanpur and a consultant at the Vision Eye Center, Mumbai, also the co-founder of Youthful IRSI. And she will be talking to us about expression, articulation, and counseling.
Thank you so much for having me here on this panel. My topic for today is keys to success, expression, articulation, and counseling. We know that 100% or 99% of our practice is all about communication. What is counseling but? Influencing the behavior of a prospective customer's purchasing capacity. And who are the customers? Are the patients. Prospective to have a diagnostic eye condition and a purchasing decision of what treatment options are available. And influencing is helping the patient to make a choice. So we need to go ahead and from time to time do a self-analysis of our clinic of exactly to see what is it that we are doing well, what is it that we could be doing better, and what are the opportunities that have been missed in the past few years. So comes communication. As we know, 90% of our practice depends on our communication skills. It starts from the minute the patient walks into your clinic. The patient notices your body language when you walk up to the patient. So believe in your mind, body, and soul, because that is what is going to convince the patient. Remember, in today's day and age, they've researched all about you and their condition on the internet. They've just come to see your confidence level and indirectly take your interview. So there are three main parts of counseling, which is expression, counseling, and articulation. Sometimes as young ophthalmologists, we come across questions in our head saying, how will I win the trust and confidence of the patients that walk into my clinic? I have just started out. But remember, we've just finished our education. So we do have a good database, good knowledge base in our head. Be confident in your talk. Be true to yourself. It will show to your patient. Listen more to the patient. Patient comes with a good amount of complaints. Listen to them so that if you listen to them, you can probably convey your message more clearly to them. Understand your patient's psyche, from where they are coming and how and what they are thinking in their head, so you can talk to them in a way that they'll understand better. Smile often, give them the confidence that yes, you are here for them and you're going to help them come to a good solution for the problem that they've come to. Try and giving as much chair time as possible. I know it's not possible in a busy OPD, but to give more chair time, it makes the patient definitely happy. Having a positive attitude also definitely helps. Show some empathy, and of course have a very good body language. We also come across how to deal with unhappy patients. So again, I would say listen, and listen. That's the first and last important thing, that listen to the patient. Have and show empathy. Reassure the patient that there is not a problem that cannot be solved. We are here to help you and we will solve your problems for you. Have humility, have patience. Tell the patient that, okay, you've come here, give me time to analyze the situation and we'll come across a suitable solution for yourself. Counseling. Try to win the trust of the patient. When the patient comes to your OPD, we get the paperwork before done by the optometrist. So we already know that, the patient has a cataract. So once the patient walks in, just saying that, you have a cataract and you need to get operated is not the right approach. You have to spend some time on the slit lamp, do a dilated examination, go over. So they feel that, okay, yeah, we've looked at every aspect of it. And then the doctor has said that, yes, I have this condition. This is how I help you. Pan out all the options to them, tell them from this range to that range, everything that is options are possible to them, and let them have a choice. Also touch upon the fact of finance. Tell them that I know this is your budget and this is what, I can help you financially in this way. So when they know that the doctor itself is looking after the finances of the patient, it wins the trust of the patient as well. Make sure your staff is well oriented and they have a good counseling as well. And of course, give more chair time to the patient. In case in complications, how do you communicate in case there is no complication? Do not be scared. First of all, be responsible for it. Do not hide the complication. Don't act guilty. It's not a crime. We are also in our learning phases and complications happen. It's not that, oh my God, I made a complication, I'm a pathetic surgeon. Absolutely not. Even the best of the best surgeons do have complications. So don't act guilty. It's definitely not a crime. But yes, when you have the complication, be honest to yourself and to the patient. Explain them clearly to the patient that yes, we've had a complication, but the surgery has gone off well and we'll restore your vision, or give positive feedbacks to the patient so they know that, okay, even though there was some problem, the doctor handled it. Make sure your tone and language is nice. Don't be harsh, and don't be very rude to the patient. And show empathy and documentation is very, very, very important in today's day and age. In many a times we have a patient who comes with a complication from another doctor. So what do we do in such conditions? First of all, explain the condition properly and suggest proper measures. Communicate in a very nice way. Do not be rude or behave superior to the other doctor. Try to tell the patient that yes, if this condition would have come to me, probably the same complication would have happened to in my clinic as well, in my setup. But today you've come to me with this problem. Instead of figuring out and talking back about the doctor or what happened and where it happened, we'll come to a solution today. Stop backbiting on your colleagues, because at the end of the day, it is your colleagues who, your patient also might go to another doctor, and you don't want anyone to backbite each other. One more important thing is having a good place, and your staff should be well trained. Having a well-equipped clinic that impresses the patient the minute they enter. Make sure your clinic is clean and tidy. Have a well-trained staff that knows everything about the surgery. Reduce the patient's stress and tension before he or she visits the doctor. Gets them time to digest that he will she require surgery. I have noticed that most of the patients feel lot of more at ease when asking questions to the staff. So make sure that they are staffed, are well equipped, and they know everything about what is happening at your clinic, because it reduces your chair time luckily with the patient. For the staff, have a timely orientation with the clinic staff. Ask the lens company people to come and brief your staff about it, because sometimes these staffs don't enter the OT, don't enter the operation theater. They're just at the reception and they're made to do counseling, but they do not know exactly what is happening in the operation theater, of what are the complications. So they sometimes tend to give false beliefs and false impressions that okay, this everything will happen successfully and no problems will happen. But no, they should know, and they should explain to the negatives also to the patient, that you might, in case if it's a LASIK surgery, you might get your number back. It's not that you provide them with false belief that no, LASIK ho gaya to matlab there'll be no glasses again. You can help the staff provide the patients with visual and demonstration. Incentivizing your staff for every patient who gets counseled properly is very, very important, because that way they counsel them in a right way, and plus they're getting incentivized. So, they're motivated to work more and in a better way as well. Leave the choice to the patient. Discuss the merits and demerits of every option that you give. Explain everything to the patient, including the negatives. Like if you're putting a multifocal in the patient, make sure you emphasize that you will see glare and halos. They might not see it's a different thing, but at least put it in their head that yes, you're putting a multifocal, you're definitely going to see glares and halos. Reset their expectations. Always under promise and always overachieve, so that way you at least have the barrier that okay, you have under promised it, but the patient will be much, much happier when you over deliver. And always try talking to the decision maker of the family, because ultimately they are the ones who are going to finally decide for the mother or father of the patient. reassurance should be given to the patient, reduce their stress by reinforcing on positive things, minimize using negative dialect in our conversations, and of course, as I said from starting of my talk, listen as much as you can to the patients, because that is what they've come here to a doctor to vent out their feelings and frustrations, and although the conditions of the eye, because if we don't listen to their complaints, then who will? Clearly communicate the older and newer technologies that are available, understand the patient's lifestyle, needs and wants, understanding his or her profession as well as his patient's psychic is very, very important. Listening to their doubts, thoughts, and learning about deep thought making to the patient, explaining the patient entire procedure to them in a simple language so that they feel that they've been a part of the process from the start itself, so that you can explain to them that this are the steps of the procedure and this is what is going to happen. And showing some patient testimonial videos on the cases that are similar is extremely successful and helps and clears the patient's doubt as well. And of course, answering all their questions clinically and financially in a cool, calm way, even though you've had a busy OPD and they're asking the stupidest of the stupid questions, but make sure, you go ahead and that final touch is answering their questions if they have any. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Pooja, for that presentation. Next, we have Dr. Samresh Srivastav, currently working as a consultant ophthalmologist at Raghudeep Eye.
Rohan, we lost your audio.
Name and has a special interest in complicated cataracts and managing subluxated lenses. So we'll be talking to us about the challenges in joining an established practice.
Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, Rohan and Pooja, for inviting me for this talk and to the ISI youthful session. Guys are doing a great job at conducting this session. So I'm just going to briefly discuss on my experience of what happened when I joined an established clinical practice. And I think there could be some key takeaway points from this. It took me a lot of, it was quite interesting making this presentation, I must say. So just to brief about me, I graduated in Mysore and I did my post-graduation in Shankar Nethralaya. And once I finished my residency, I thought that, with an institute backing like this, I had all the knowledge sorted out and I had the skill set to go out and achieve what I wanted to anywhere I wanted to. And I landed up after my fellowship, my post-graduation program at Raghudeep Eye Hospital, which was in Ahmedabad. And for those of you who are not aware of Raghudeep Eye Hospital, it's the director of the hospital who spearheaded the hospital and brought it to new heights. Was Dr. Abhay Vasavada, who at some point in time was leading the cataract sort of change from SICS and ECC to cataract in the country, and had a lot of laurels to him. Also, interestingly, I was married into the family. So I was married to Dr. Vasavada's daughter. And so the fellowship came as a, as a gift to me, which I had no choice but to accept. But the first thing I realized the moment I joined this place was that this was a big gang of overachievers. So it was not just Dr. Vasavada, but it was also the daughters. There were the rest of the doctors, the fellows who had passed out, and everybody had something in their kitty, which I obviously didn't have because I just finished my post-graduation. So one of the big challenges that I faced was just to figure out how to settle down and how to blend myself into this big gang of overachievers. The first conference I attended was within the first few weeks of joining in, and the house was packed even before the session started. And so there was a lot of pressure, obviously, and a lot of expectation coming out of people towards looking at who was joined next. So when you join an established practice, and particularly in practices which are family-run practices, you will realize that there is a lot of if your practices are established for over a decade or two, you will realize that there is a lot of pressure from the environment, and there's a lot of pressure from the peers because they all expect you to have a certain minimal standard to take care of, which you may not really have because you don't have the kind of experience in the beginning. So like I said, to make matters worse, that's my wife, Vaishali. She's also a cataract surgeon. But not only was I married, I was also a fellow under her for about 2 years. So I had to stand next to her, take her notes, and she would assist my surgeries. So this was a big character building experience for me. Now, not only was I alone, my sister-in-laws, my brother-in-laws, everybody was doing the fellowships or had just joined as consultants. So we were a big family at home, but we were also working together, trying to understand newer surgeries which are coming up, because last decade was the decade of change for everyone, where femtos joined in and phaco underwent a revolution again. So what one needs to understand when you join a big practice or a set practice is that it's already a full-blown tree. You're just a small part of it. So no matter how much energy you come out with in your fellowship program, you have to understand that, or a post-graduation program, you have to understand that you have to now fit into this big scheme of events that's there. This was the team when I joined, and you can't even notice me in a corner over there. So it's really important to understand that you're not a big picture anymore, which you already had in your mind. If you do a single practice, if you start a single proprietorship or your own clinic, it's a different story. But when you want to do something in an institution, you have to understand the first thing you want to unlearn and relearn is a different system of working. Every institute has its own technique, has its own nuances, has its own systems. Private practice is very different from institutional practice, is very different from government practice. So there's a lot of unlearning and relearning to be done. A lot of unlearning in the sense that what you believed was a standard of care is now changing, because it's now a specialized clinic with a specialized set of rules and a specialized system of working up patients. And one needs to be open to the idea of adopting newer techniques and also changing your way you have looked at ophthalmology in your residency. One big thing that I want to bring about, more than the educational or the clinical aspect, is that when you join an institute, you need to understand in good detail, with spending enough time, what the core values of that institution are. Because you have to align to this institution that's developed over the years. There are some core values that will be apparent to you, but there are some subtle ones which are basically the backbone of the institution, but you will never know. Like performing charity work, or performing ethical code of conduct, or having a system of values where patients given a priority. You have to figure it out. You have to ask your seniors, you have to ask the consultants, and that is something it's not clinical, but it will govern how you blend into the system and then you shine out of it. The good part is there's no struggle to get patients, because the moment you sit in the clinic, you have ample number of patients. So for those of you who really want to just start on with work and don't want to break their head with the economics of it, this may be a great option. But for somebody who wants to create one's own presence in this ophthalmology world or in the society, it may be a little difficult, because the boundaries have been set, the foundation has been laid, the levels have been set. So for you to make your own mark, it's going to take some time. Nobody's going to pay attention to what you're going to do. People are going to not come to show you their eyes or come to you with problems, but they're going to come to senior doctors. And no matter where you've been trained and no matter how skilled you are, it's going to take time. So you better be in this for a long haul, because it's unlike a single person's practice with the 5-person clinic which you're going to sit on is going to be yours. This is not yours. You have to prove to the patients that you are worth their time and effort and money. Again, even if you have a radical idea, you want to challenge the normality, it's not going to be easy, because there's going to be a lot of friction, simply because the system has worked for so long. The system, and nobody wants to change a system which has shown results, no matter how radical your idea may be. But if you work it up and you prove the point and you go in a stepwise fashion, it may not be impossible. It's just, like I said, going to take time. Administrative work comes as a part and parcel. There's no escaping it. If you're joining institutional work, and especially if you're joining a family practice, or if you're if you're taking over somebody's practice, it's very important to understand that your clinical knowledge is on one side, but you have to know a lot of skills. You have to know finance, you have to know housekeeping, you have to know management, you have to know HR. A bit of everything may be required, and all this will happen in the course of one day. So you have to change your roles as fast as you can. But now comes the important part. Once you've set in and once you've joined in and you've learned the working of the institute, you want to grow, because as a human being, it's everybody's tendency to grow from where they are and to become a little bigger than where they were. If you want to change this, you have to understand that not only is it important for us, all of us, to maintain the standards of where we work, but to raise the bar every time we work over there, and to put up newer standards which are only higher and not drop down in the course of time. Which essentially means sometimes you have to handle, for the lack of a better word, dead wood, which is always there in every organization. And sometimes it's so deep rooted that it will pull you down with it and it will not let you grow. So you have to be intelligent about it, reasonable and rational about it, and when required, deviate the system. It may be unpleasant for many, but this is the way it should work, because you are now going to be taking charge of the situation. it's really important to understand that, you know, we've all learned this in school. We all learned this in all those children who used to see the Doordarshan, you know, earlier on, that there is strength in teamwork. And so I must tell you that if you understand that in life, if you really need to grow, it has to be a team, and not one person can achieve too much in life. When we teamed up, all of us, we had a winning streak. So for close to a decade, we were on a winning streak in terms of the number of publications we did and the number of awards we received, be it the ACRS or the APSCRS. So we have and it was a winning high. But this could only be possible because there were people who were designated for different roles, and we all understood each other over the course of time. So when you join an institute, it's exceptionally important that you understand your roles and you get other people time and space to breathe as well. Now, trying to take the brand ahead, like I said, you know, sitting down and just getting comfortable is one way, but getting comfortable will get you nowhere in life. So you always have to challenge the system. You always have to grow, and you always have to look for what next is going to happen. Like I said, under a big tree, a small one will never really thrive because the shadow is too dense for you to grow. So we decided that we're going to take the brand ahead, and from Raghudeep Eye Hospital, Ahmedabad, we opened up another branch in Ahmedabad, and eventually opened a branch in Jaipur, which is here, where Shali and I, my wife and I, run. And we expanded to a newer branch, which is upcoming. Hopefully by the end of first quarter next year, we should be shifting into a newer place. Again, like I said, up your standards. So this is nothing to do with institutional practice, but like Pooja brought about, it's Dr. Pooja's points was so bang on. You don't have to have plush, but you need to have clean. You need to have visible, and you need to have light. Positivity in a clinic will always be very welcome. So if your clinics are old and you've joined institutions, be upfront and tell them you need to change the decor a little bit, bring in a little more positive vibes, and that should be the end of it. Now, so like just to summarize it, it's not easy. Joining any place in single practice is not easy. Institutional practice is not easy. Joining your father's practice is not easy. Nothing is easy because you have to live up to the expectations and you have to do better. Sometimes it's really difficult because if you're living under a big tree that's already made a huge identity, it may be very difficult for you to break out, but that should not be a reason to give up, and one should really strive for it. On the good part, there's a lot of potential for growth because the team is already in place. You just have to go in, see the system, understand it, and try to push it to a newer level. And that's the only way you can take a bigger leap, you know, going from a single place to an institutional work, going from institution to a chain of hospitals. But most importantly, it gives you enough time to pursue what you like because you have other people to look out for. So you don't really have to get involved in the nitty-gritties. I like old things and old people. So, you know, I spend my time in cleaning up my old cars and doing up new old cars. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for a very candid and very enlightening, presentation. You brought out the points so very well that, it's very difficult to grow under a large tree. So you have to do something different. You have to branch out. And that's the only way that's going to happen. And also challenging what you think is not correct. So established practices have been running for a long period of time, and people tend to get into their comfort zone and they do things the way they are doing it. But you should have the courage to challenge that as well. Excellent, excellent talk, sir.
Thank you.
Very well talked about, Samresh, and also to, it was interesting to bring out the personal and the professional both in that, in your presentation. And it is always, the bigger the organization, the more well established it is, it's always difficult to bring about change. So that also reminds me of a book that once the IBM CEO had written about elephants can dance too. So you can actually make them change, but it takes a lot of effort. So I think that's what it is. But I think a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of this session. Dr. Digvijay sir, if you can close this session.
Yes, and I think I also want to congratulate both of you, Rohan, Pooja, for Youthful IRSI, the association, as well as, for so beautifully conducting this session and, getting this kick started and pushing it off. And I hope there are many more sessions for you guys in the future under this banner. And I think very wonderfully planned. And, from the OC perspective, we'll be very happy to, be collaborating with you and take things on. But a wonderful session, and congratulations, everyone.
Thank you so much.
We have a Youthful Chapter 13 this Wednesday. that's 22nd at 8 p.m. on March to Zero Endophthalmitis. So we'll be sharing out the details soon. So please do join, because that's the need of the hour of how to go about if you get an endophthalmitis, documentation, medical legal aspects. We have a medical legal lawyer as well on board. So, we plan to discuss a lot of things because that is need of the hour. So do join us this Wednesday, 22nd, 8 p.m. Chapter 13, March to Zero Endophthalmitis.